Hello, and welcome back to another J Safe Space. Now, guys, I'm not going to be before you long. I'm going to do this really quick just so we all can get back to our lives. Um, there are a couple things that have dropped in my heart and my spirit this past week, and I want to share them with you all. So the first thing is I was working in the garden, and for those who don't know, I love getting out in the soil, out in the sun, and just spending time with the plants and with my family, harvesting and sowing and weeding and all of the things. And I was I was spending some time this past week in my strawberry patch. And an analogy for that strawberry patch dropped into my soul, dropped into my being, dropped into the bones, dropped into the hair follicles. It dropped in because I could see it have a direct reflection in my own life. So for those who don't know how strawberries grow, in like a patch. That's what they're typically called, a strawberry patch, or you can put them in hanging, like a hanging planter. But the thing about strawberries is that they're always focused on expansion. They're always focused on getting the plant to take over more space, take over more area, because those berries will grow under and on top of those leaves. And many times the more area it seems to have, the better it can do. But what's really interesting is expansion does not always equal fruit. That was the analogy for me, is that expansion does not always equal fruit. When the plant is so focused on spreading and going here, going there, doing this next thing, taking on this next project, taking on this next responsibility, taking on this new title, taking on this new extracurricular, then there's no fruit being produced. You just have a whole bunch of leaves. You have a whole bunch of roots. You have a whole bunch of the vine spreading. But when we prune it back and we cut those spreaders off just a little early, and we get the plant into a more controlled environment so that it can focus on the fruit. It produces fruit. You have more blooms. You have a better, stronger plant that is focused on producing fruit instead of producing projects. You get what I'm saying? There's a difference between expanding for the sake of expansion and expanding your skill set so that you can produce more fruit. Sometimes we have to allow that plant to grow and spread a little bit so that it has more space to do what it needs to do. But also sometimes you have to cut it off and say, hey, not yet. We're not going there just yet. We're not crossing over that barrier just yet. That's not where you're supposed to be right now. So that was the first analogy that dropped in my soul. The second one that came to me was, it's so interesting when you think about things like companion planting and you think about plants that don't like being around other plants. And this one create too much nitrogen in the soil, and this one might take too much of the this, that, and the other. And as I was thinking about it, I just heard really loudly and clearly, someone needs to mind their business. And I was like, I felt a little disrespected. I was like, Divine, are you, what? But what was interesting about it is that you can't, and it goes back to that strawberry plant as well, you can't produce the fruit that you're capable of producing if you're minding everybody else's business. It does not mean you are supposed to be selfish all the time. There's a difference between selfishness and self-fullness. The goal is to be self-full, not selfish. Okay? So keep that in mind. But also, like, it's important that if you know that you have, which we all do, you have a divine purpose, a divine reason for being on this planet, for being in the space of the people that are around you. If you're so focused on what they're doing, you can't focus on what you're doing. If you're so focused on how they're affecting you and how this, that, and the other with those people, what are you doing to focus on your own energy, your own growth, your own plan? I had to check myself because I'm very empathetic. I am a highly empathetic person, almost to a fault, that I found myself so concerned about others' condition that I wasn't noticing my own deteriorate. I was so concerned about the quality of life for other people that I wasn't noticing the quality of my life deteriorate. I was so concerned about other people's happiness, other people having a safe space, other people having a person to turn to, that I wasn't making sure all of those things were provided for me as well. And it makes me think about on the airline, when you're on the airplane and they're like, put on your mask first before you're trying to help somebody else. That is not just for planes. That is life. You can't pour from an empty vessel. You can't give when you have nothing to give. You can't give from an empty bushel. You just can't do it. It's impossible for you to pour into someone else's life and you don't have anything to give. It's impossible for you to be someone else's rock and you're barely standing for yourself. So what I heard loudly and clearly is that we all might need to be doing a reset right now. We might need to be doing a reset for ourselves, a personal reset to get back to developing your own self, minding your own business. Mind your business. That's what I hear loudly and clearly. And I'm speaking to me just as much as I'm speaking to the J Safe Space crowd in the 5011 fam. I'm speaking to all of us in this moment because I think it's something that's really important. There is a lot of craziness in the world that requires our attention, that requires our prayer, that requires our energy. There's a lot of craziness in this world. But it's a direct reflection of that craziness and your own personal craziness. And sometimes we don't want to see it because we don't want to admit that everything's not okay. I am the strong friend in many of my friend circles and my friend groups. And it's difficult for me to say when things are tough. It's difficult for me to come to anybody other than my mom and God and be like, hey, it's hard right now. Hey, I'm struggling right now. And I found myself having to be more honest with myself. Because if you're not being real with yourself, how can you expect anybody else to be real with you? How can you expect to be able to be real with other people? It goes back to it all being about you. Everything that happens in your life, everything that you experience is a direct reflection to you. It could be internal, it could be external. But this week's message, this week's lesson is mind your own business so that you can be better for those around you, so that you can pour into those around you, and so that you can raise the standard of those around you. I'm sending you all love, I'm sending you all peace, and I will see you next week in another J Safe Space.